At the rehearsal dinner for her charity gala, she paused mid-twirl, fixed her perfect smile, and whispered, "Dad, if you embarrass me tonight, I'll pretend I don't know you." That single line cut deeper than any raised eyebrow, because I realized in that instant how far our worlds had drifted apart. She stood there in her designer gown, a vision of poise and precision, while I leaned against the buffet table, sleeves rolled up from an afternoon of hands-on preparations, mending risers, checking light cables, even polishing the brass fixtures on the podium. She saw a spectacle I was about to create. I saw a daughter I was trying to protect. I slipped away after that, stepping into the empty corridor, lined with mirrors that reflected her image back at me from every angle. In her reflection, she looked fragile, bearer of an image she'd built so carefully, and I felt the weight of every unpolished truth I'd ever carried. Memories flooded me, teaching her to ride a bike on cracked pavement, late nights perched at the kitchen counter helping her with science homework, the scraped elbows I'd bandaged before school dances, and the quiet sacrifices I'd made so she'd never feel unprepared. Those moments had never been about appearances, but about love and trust, and now it seemed none of that mattered if I couldn't fit into her polished narrative. Later that night, I sat alone in the darkness of her empty room, listening to the soft hum of the city below. The gala invitations lay scattered on her desk, each one a promise of prestige, of networking, of an image refined to a glossy finish. I traced the embossed letters with a fingertip, feeling the gulf between the daughter who wanted perfection and the father who had always believed in authenticity. I wondered, could the man who helped her become the woman she was also be the one to risk everything just to speak his truth? When I finally left her room, I didn't carry the envelope, the speech drafts, or the meticulously crafted talking points she'd prepared for me. I carried only the echo of her words and the fierce conviction that some things, honesty, vulnerability, the bond between parent and child, were worth more than any image. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew that tonight, at the podium, I would speak not to preserve her public face, but to honor the private truths that made us who we were. Friends, let me take a short pause. Would you mind sharing in the comments? Where are you listening from? Has anything like this ever happened in your life? A moment when someone close to you asked you to shrink just so they could shine? If this story speaks to you, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. That's how you help us grow this channel and keep telling stories that matter. Now, let's continue. The envelope was thick, heavy, like it had something to prove. Gold foil edges, elegant calligraphy, a subtle shimmer when the light touched it just right. She placed it on my kitchen table like a crown, not offered but presented. I opened it carefully, more out of instinct than reverence. Years of working with my hands had taught me how to handle delicate things. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling are cordially invited. I paused there. My wife had been gone for 6 years. I looked up. My daughter was already looking away, adjusting her cuff, sipping tea she didn't really want. "It's just the standard format," she said quickly. "Everyone gets the same." I nodded, but I knew. This wasn't about etiquette. This was about message, appearances, making sure the image remained pristine, even if it meant polishing over a part of us that no longer breathed. The gala, she explained, was a fundraiser for a hospital arts program. Black tie, press coverage, potential sponsors, political names. She was co-chairing it, steering the vision, as she put it. I was proud, of course I was, but something about the way she described it made me feel like I was being interviewed for access to her orbit. And then came the subtle instructions. "They've already written a few things for you," she said, sliding a slim folder across the table. "If you choose to say anything on stage." As if silence might be the safer path, I opened it that evening long after she'd left. It wasn't a speech. It was a script. Polished. Hollow. Lines I'd never use. Words I'd never say. Not because I couldn't, but because they weren't mine. It spoke of grit, in vague metaphors, sacrifice dressed in expensive phrases. There was a whole paragraph about humble beginnings, written by someone who had clearly never stepped foot in a hardware store or fixed a sink at midnight with a flashlight between his teeth. And yet, my name was on it. The speech was designed not to honor me, but to contain me. A placeholder, a symbol of resilience, as long as I didn't speak too clearly about what that had cost. I understood then she wasn't ashamed of me. She was afraid of me, afraid that my truth, raw, unfiltered, scarred in all the places where image demanded polish, would ruin the narrative she had so carefully curated. That I'd mention things like debt and doubt, and the year I had to sell my truck to pay her tuition. That I'd speak like a father, not a fixture. That I'd be real. And real was dangerous in a room full of cameras. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that I didn't want to ruin her night. I wanted to restore something in it, not with noise, but with memory, with weight, because under all the chandeliers and sequins and curated applause, someone had to remind the room what the word honor really meant, and that someone was still me. It started small, as these things always do. A raised eyebrow at a planning meeting, a polite silence when my name was mentioned, the kind of silence that doesn't settle the room, but chills it. Then came the questions disguised as jokes. Will your dad wear a tie? Does he know how to navigate media presence? Are you sure he's comfortable in that kind of crowd? They never said my name. They didn't need to. To them, I was the dad with calloused hands, the man who didn't graduate from the kind of schools that hosted events like this, the one who fixed things, built things, repaired broken water heaters, and now, to their dismay, was being ushered into a room made for tailored suits and curated smiles. I'd been invited, but I wasn't wanted, and she knew. I saw it in the way she braced every time someone brought me up, the way she laughed too quickly when someone called me salt of the earth, the way she over-explained things about me I hadn't even said yet. She was preparing defenses for attacks that hadn't fully arrived, and in doing so was placing me behind glass like something precious, but possibly embarrassing. At one point, I heard them in the hallway, her colleagues, voices light and airy with entitlement. He's sweet, but he's not exactly marketable. Rustic charm doesn't photograph well. You know how donors are. They want stories, not stains. I didn't confront them. I didn't storm in or demand respect, because I'd heard worse in boardrooms, in waiting rooms, in the back alleys of companies I once worked for and later outgrew. But this cut deeper, because it wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from people around her, people she had chosen to orbit. And worse, she didn't stop them. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't know how to disagree without losing their favor, without risking the image she had built so carefully. She thought love meant keeping me close, just enough to feel noble, but not so close that my shadow touched her light. And I stood quietly, not because I was weak, but because I was trying, desperately, to understand the new language she lived in, a language where value was measured in curated bios and social polish, not in sacrifice and truth. The world I came from taught me to speak with action. Hers asked for performance. But love, real love, shouldn't ask you to trade one for the other. So I listened to the whispers. Let them circle. Let them write their story. Because I had my own. And soon they would hear it. Dinner was quiet that evening. Too quiet for a table once filled with burnt toast laughter and mismatched plates. The clinking of cutlery felt sharp, like a judgment, like the room itself had chosen sides. Her mother sat across from me, fingers wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. She didn't look angry. That would have been easier. Anger I could handle. But her eyes were soft, the kind of softness that comes with defeat, not love. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't with bitterness. It was with resignation. You're scaring her. 4 words. That's all it took to sink every defense I'd been holding up. She didn't say I was wrong. She didn't say I was being unfair. She simply echoed the unspoken, that somewhere along the line, my presence had become a liability. And it wasn't strangers saying it now. It was the woman who knew me when I still had grease under my fingernails and hope on credit. The woman who'd once stood beside me at midnight in the emergency room when our daughter broke her wrist. The woman who saw me patch holes in the roof with my own hands. The woman who once believed I was the safest place our child could fall. Now even she wasn't sure. I looked down at my plate, untouched. What was I supposed to say? That I loved our daughter too much to lie? That I wasn't trying to ruin her big night, only to remind her it wasn't built from thin air? That the image she clung to came from a life I gave everything to provide? But none of that came out, because love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hurts quietly. I looked at the old family photo on the shelf, the one from the carnival years ago. Our daughter sat on my shoulders, cotton candy in one hand, the other reaching for the sky. Eliza beside me, laughing, head thrown back. None of us in designer clothes, just sunburnt noses and heartful smiles. Back then, she didn't care about how I looked, or what I drove, or whether my boots had dust on them. I was her dad. That was enough. When did that change? Was it slow, like water carving stone, or fast, like a slammed door? I couldn't tell, but I could feel it. In the way Eliza now shifted when I spoke too freely, in the way our daughter pre-wrote my speech, in the way our family portrait now had an invisible crack. Not through the frame, but through the years we thought were solid. I cleared the table in silence that night, scraped untouched food into the bin, wiped down surfaces that didn't need cleaning, trying to do something, anything with my hands. The only part of me that still felt useful. And as I rinsed the dishes, I thought about what it meant to scare your own child. Not with anger, not with violence, but with truth. With the kind of love that refuses to shrink into silence. And I realized, maybe it wasn't me she feared. Maybe it was the reflection I held up. A mirror to who she used to be. A mirror that still remembered where we came from, when she so badly wanted to forget. I shut off the water, dried my hands, and stared at the closed door of her childhood bedroom, now painted over in the color of distance. Whatever speech they expected from me, I knew one thing. It wouldn't be written by fear. It would be written by love, even if it fractured what little was left. The suit was new, or new enough, bought off the rack from a department store downtown, the kind with lighting too bright and mirrors too honest. The salesman had tried to upsell me cufflinks. I declined. I wasn't there to shine, just to show up. When I got home, I hung the suit carefully on the back of the closet door, smoothing out the fabric like I was brushing away doubt. I didn't wear suits often, not because I couldn't, but because my life had always been built in clothes that could take a stain. Denim, cotton, work boots with soles that remembered every uneven floorboard I ever repaired. I planned to leave the speech in the inner pocket, folded, silent. But later that night, something drew me to her room. The way a father always knows when something's been left unsaid. Her desk was neat, too neat, like a showroom version of the daughter I remembered, the one who once colored outside the lines and left crumbs in every book she read. At the center of the desk, a manila folder. No name, just sitting there, waiting. I knew it was for me, a quiet offering or a warning. Inside, 5 pages of polished words, jargon dressed in ribbon. It read like a press release written by someone afraid of silence. Phrases like grit as a foundational asset and humility as branding. They'd turned my life into a marketing strategy, and at the very end, a handwritten note. Please read only what I wrote. Trust me, this will matter to the right people. No signature, just that. It should have broken me, but it didn't, because what broke me came next. I went back to my room, pulled out the creased piece of paper I'd tucked in my wallet weeks ago. My version, unedited, uncoated. The one I wrote one night when I couldn't sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a heart too full. It was short, messy, truthful. It didn't have bullet points or polished metaphors. It just had me. I read both versions again, side by side. One of them sparkled, the other bled, and I knew the one that bled was the one worth saying. But I didn't throw hers away. I folded it carefully, slid it into the inside pocket of my suit, not to betray her, not to obey her, but to carry the weight of the choice I would have to make. When the lights dimmed, when the music stopped, when all that was left was a microphone and 1,000 eyes watching, waiting to see which version of me I would give them. The one she constructed, or the one who raised her? I closed the closet door softly that night, as if sealing something in. And as I did, I whispered into the silence, "You trusted me once. You'll have to trust me again." Because I wasn't going to stand on that stage and pretend my love for her had ever been made for show. The night before the gala, the house felt too quiet. That heavy, loaded kind of quiet. Not peace, but pressure. The kind of silence that lingers just before a storm, or right after something sacred is broken. I stood alone in the living room, the same room where, years ago, I'd danced with her to old Motown records while dinner bubbled on the stove, where she once rehearsed her school presentations, standing on the coffee table with oversized paper cue cards, asking me if she looked confident enough, where we celebrated report cards with root beer floats and birthdays with too much frosting. Now the table was bare, the lights were low, the room, once full of sound and crumbs and teenage declarations, now looked like a place someone had tried to erase and repaint. And there I was, holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than all the years I'd carried her. I unfolded it and read the first line aloud. "My name is Robert Sterling, and I'm the father of tonight's co-chair." I stopped. The words felt hollow, like they belonged to someone else, a stranger in a borrowed name, too clean, too rehearsed. I folded the paper again, slid it into my back pocket. Then I picked up mine, the one I'd written late one night, when memory tugged at my chest and the pen moved without filter. I looked around the room at the empty chairs and the soft whir of the refrigerator, humming like distant applause. No audience, no spotlight, just walls that had known our truest selves. And I began to speak, not for practice, but for honesty. I spoke of the first time I held her, how she fit in the crook of my arm like the world had always made space for her. I spoke of scraped knees and sleepless nights, of science fairs and shy smiles, of the way she used to introduce me with pride. My dad can fix anything. I remembered every moment her voice cracked from nerves, and I stood in the back of the auditorium, mouthing, "You've got this," until she believed it. I remembered her teenage defiance, her ambition, the time she told me she wanted more than I had, and the way I smiled, hiding the ache, and said, "Then go get it." And now? Now she had it. The spotlight, the respect, the room full of names that nodded when she spoke. But in getting there, she'd started to fear the roots she once grew from, not because they were wrong, but because they were real. And real is dangerous in rooms where everything is performance. I paused in my story, suddenly aware of my hands. Rough, cracked from decades of work. They didn't fit the sleek image of the evening she'd planned, but they'd carried her, held her steady, built the life she now called her foundation. And that was enough. I finished my speech, not the one in my pocket. Mine, the one with edges and weight. And I folded it, not to hide it, but to carry it, to hold it close like I'd once held her, trusting that truth, when spoken with love, doesn't ruin the image. It reveals it. And no matter what happened tomorrow, I knew one thing. I wouldn't step onto that stage as a shadow of who I'd been. I would walk up there as her father, the one who didn't wear polish, but who never stopped shining for her. The ballroom pulsed with light and pretense. Crystal chandeliers swayed gently above us like frozen fireworks, and the hum of conversation was velvet smooth, calculated, pleasant, hollow. Every table was clothed in gold-threaded linen, every chair wrapped in silk, every face painted in the practiced ease of social survival. My shoes felt too heavy on the polished floor as I walked past tables of strangers dressed like royalty but speaking like rehearsed scripts. I wasn't from this world, never had been, and every step I took toward that stage reminded them of it. When my name was called, it was polite, almost apologetic, as if even the MC wanted to distance himself from the risk. A few heads turned, uncertain, and then they saw me. The room didn't fall silent, but it shifted, subtly, like air being pulled out of a balloon just before it bursts. I could feel their eyes scanning me, the hands that had held wrenches, the suit that didn't carry a brand name, the posture that said, "I've stood for hours without needing applause." My daughter was seated front and center, flanked by peers whose suits cost more than my first truck. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Her eyes locked on mine like a warning. Behind them, dread, fragile and trembling. But beneath that, something else. Defiance, yes, but also fear. Not fear of me, fear of truth. I reached the stairs. The wood was slick beneath my soles. I climbed them slowly, deliberately, like every step was a decision. And it was, each one louder than the last, louder than the murmur now circling the room like a question no one dared voice. Is he really going to speak? At the podium, the lights hit my face, hot and white. My fingers brushed the microphone. I could feel my heartbeat in my palms. The speech she had written for me, folded neatly and tucked inside my suit, burned against my chest like a betrayal I hadn't yet committed. I looked down, then up, faces blurred in the light. But hers was sharp, clear, and scared. I took a breath, the kind of breath you only take when you know there's no going back. And I began. No notes, no script, just voice, just truth. And in that moment, under 1,000 tiny crystals pretending to be stars, I became the one thing that room wasn't prepared for. Real. I was told I'd ruin my daughter's image. That was all it took. No fanfare, no clever opener, just the truth, sharp, raw, and unforgiving. The room stilled. Utensils paused midair. Wine glasses hovered, untasted. Eyes that moments ago danced with distraction now locked in, unwilling or unable to look away. I hadn't planned those words. They simply rose from somewhere too deep to rehearse. And once spoken, they didn't echo. They settled. Heavy, personal. A quiet, undeniable weight in a room that had only prepared for polish, not pain. I saw it happen. The shift. The artificial ease in their postures began to fade. One woman blinked too quickly. A man across the table uncrossed his legs, like suddenly uncomfortable. They hadn't expected vulnerability. They'd expected a quaint, forgettable anecdote about fatherhood, light, sweet, sanitized. Instead, I gave them a confession. I was told I'd ruin her image, I repeated, softer this time, not for drama, but because I felt it, in my bones, in the breath I had to steady between syllables. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers clutched her napkin. It was enough. She knew, and I knew she was afraid. Not of what I would say, but of what they would hear, of what they would finally see. And yet, I hadn't come to shame her. I came because she mattered, because our story mattered, because truth mattered more than comfort. So I kept going. I told them about building our first home, not hiring it built, but building it. Hammer, nail, bare hands. I told them about the night she stayed up past midnight, studying for a biology test and cried when she got a B+. I told them how we used to sit on the hood of my truck and name stars because we couldn't afford telescopes, but we had time, and sometimes that's richer. I told them about her heart, the little girl who collected rocks and believed they had memories, the teenager who wrote letters to soldiers she never met, the college graduate who once whispered, "I want to change lives, Dad, just like you changed mine." And I paused, because the silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was listening. I could see them, those people who came to impress and be impressed, slowly remembering what it was to feel something that wasn't filtered through ambition. In a room built to elevate image, I had dropped it, and lifted meaning instead. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there, voice steady, heart open, offering them not a performance, but a memory, a glimpse of what love looks like when it trades polish for permanence. And as I reached for the next line, the one she hadn't written, the one I'd carried in my chest since the day she was born, I felt something shift in her too. She looked at me, not in anger, not even fear anymore, but something closer to recognition, maybe even pride. The very thing she was once afraid I'd take from her. Now I was giving back. I didn't mean to unravel her carefully stitched world, but the moment I began to speak from memory, not from paper, the seams started to loosen. I talked about the science fair in 3rd grade, where she built a papier-mâché volcano that refused to erupt, how she burst into tears 5 minutes before judging, convinced she'd failed, and how I kneeled beside her, not to fix it, but to tell her she didn't have to explode to be extraordinary. I told them how she stayed up late that night, not to win, but to make something that mattered, and how when she finally won second place, she whispered, "That's okay. You're still my first." The audience was still now, completely still. The kind of stillness that says, "Don't move. Something real is happening." No clinking glasses, no hushed side talk, just silence, like the room was holding its breath in reverence. I let it settle. Then I told them about the time she fell off her bike at the top of the hill. Her knee bloodied, pride shattered. I carried her home that day, all 60 pounds of tears and scraped skin. I didn't say much then, just wiped the dirt from her palms and hummed the lullaby her mother used to sing. That was the first time she looked at me like I was unbreakable. But what I never told her, until that moment, was that I was scared too. Scared I hadn't protected her well enough. Scared she wouldn't trust me to catch her again. I said that out loud now, on stage, to a ballroom filled with people wearing masks of perfection, just like she was. And I saw something shift, not just in her, though her eyes had begun to shine with something other than performance. But in the room, people leaned forward. A woman near the front lowered her phone and just listened. A man beside her pressed a napkin to his mouth, blinking harder than the lights above allowed. Because vulnerability, when it's real, doesn't embarrass. It invites. It calls forth something buried under years of pretending. I didn't have a single line from her speech. I wasn't charming or clever. I stumbled a few words. My voice cracked once, maybe twice. But I kept going. Because these stories, our stories, weren't for show. They were roots. Roots that didn't glitter, didn't post well on social media, didn't wear designer gowns or speak in curated quotes. But they held. They held her when she cried. They held her when she doubted herself. They held her when she needed to remember who she was. And now, maybe they were holding this room too. I looked down at her, my daughter whose fear had once begged me to stay small. And I realized she wasn't trembling from shame. She was trembling from memory. Because somewhere deep inside the polish, she remembered those nights, those wounds, that love. And maybe, just maybe, she missed it. I paused, not out of hesitation, but to let the question settle, not just in their ears, but in their ribs. They told me my truth would embarrass her. The words hung there, not heavy like an accusation, but honest like air after rain. The ballroom, grand, gilded, artificially warm, went cold. No music, no polite laughter, just the sound of a truth none of them expected. I scanned the faces, not looking for sympathy, just searching for honesty. Some trace of a heart still willing to feel, not just perform. Most looked stunned, some looked away. A few stared like they'd forgotten how to blink. And then I asked what none of them had the courage to, but which of us betrayed whom? A slow intake of breath across the room. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just human, real. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because the weight wasn't in the volume. It was in the question itself. Was it the one who held her hand during fevered nights? The one who worked 2 shifts so she could take ballet and violin? The one who taught her how to change a tire, how to apologize, how to stand back up when you fall flat on your pride? I paused, my throat tightening, not with fear, but memory. Or was it the ones who love her only when she fits their narrative? The ones who love her as long as she forgets where she came from? Stillness, not a single whisper now. She didn't have to tell me to stay quiet. Her silence said it all. The way she avoided my name on the printed program. The way she corrected my words behind closed doors. The way she asked me to just let her handle the speech. My hands gripped the edge of the podium, not out of anger, but to steady something far older. The ache of watching someone you raised slowly forget the sound of your voice. Not because they don't love you, but because they've been taught that love, in its raw form, is inconvenient. They wanted polish. I gave her presents. I took a breath, one that trembled. They wanted image. I gave her identity. Another pause. This one cut deeper. They told her I'd ruin her image, but no one asked what it did to me. To be asked to erase myself for the sake of her acceptance. To be told that love, once loud and messy and magical, now needed to be quiet, distant, sterilized. A flicker in the corner of my eye, her hand lifting toward her mouth. Maybe to hide emotion, maybe to catch it. But I wasn't finished. I raised her not to fit in. I raised her to belong. I taught her that dignity doesn't need approval. It needs memory. And somewhere between galas and campaigns, between curated bios and spotlight interviews, she forgot the power of where she came from. My voice softened now, not out of exhaustion, out of love. But I haven't forgotten. I still see the little girl who hugged my neck so tightly on the first day of school, she left a wrinkle in my collar. I still hear the voice that once whispered, "Dad, promise me you'll always be proud of me, even if I don't become someone important." I looked at her then, straight into her eyes, and for the first time all evening she didn't look away. I promised, and I meant it, and here's the truth. I stepped back slightly from the mic. My next words were quieter. For her, and only her. You don't have to become someone important for me to love you, but I wish you'd remember that the man you're afraid of is the one who taught you how to stand on this stage. Silence. The crowd didn't move. No applause, no whispers, no polite transitions, just stillness. The kind that lives in moments where something real finally rises to the surface and dares to breathe. And in that silence, for the first time all night, I saw her lips part, and the daughter I thought I'd lost blinked, not with shame, but with something that looked a lot like remembering. It began softly. A chair creaked, a fork tapped gently against a plate, and then one pair of hands, applauding, slow, uncertain, but true. Then another, until the sound rose like a tide, a slow-building wave of realization, of understanding, that came not all at once, but like sunlight rising over old shadows. This wasn't the kind of applause people give out of politeness or pressure. This was something different. This was recognition. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't waited for it. But it came anyway. Not for the suit I wore, not for the stage I stood on, not for the room I was finally allowed into. It came for the truth, for the memory of a father who gave everything not to be seen but to support, who didn't shine because he had to, but because his love simply refused to dim. The murmurs swelled into a current of reverent awe, and I saw them, her friends, her colleagues, leaning forward now, not out of curiosity, but with a new kind of attention, the kind that said, "We thought we knew her story. We didn't." Their faces changed, eyes softened. A few looked down, like realizing they had only ever known her through the edited version, the one that looked good in interviews, the one that photographed well. But I had lived in the unedited version, the one that stayed up late with growing pains and impossible math homework, the one that sang off key in the kitchen, the one that once cried in my arms after her first heartbreak and asked, "Why do people stop loving you when you make mistakes?" She didn't know it then, but I'd already decided I never would. And now she saw it. All of it. Because when I looked down from that podium, I didn't just see her face. I saw her expression change. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, as if an invisible weight had slipped from them. The weight of performance, of holding together a version of herself that was never meant to carry so much. And her breath caught. It was subtle, a quick, visible inhale, sharp and sudden, like something within her had cracked open. She wasn't angry. She wasn't ashamed. She was remembering the things she had pushed aside to climb, the man she had placed in the background to shine, the love she had once held with both hands, messy, loud, unconditional. She saw me now, not as a footnote to her success, but as the author of the chapters that taught her what strength really meant. Not the kind that walks confidently into rooms like this one, but the kind that walks into fire, again and again, to carry someone else through it. She looked around her, at the very people she once feared would judge her for me, but now they were watching me with something she hadn't seen before. Respect, not the kind you buy, not the kind you earn with degrees or titles, the kind that comes when someone dares to speak the truth and doesn't flinch. I didn't smile, not yet, because this wasn't a victory, this was a reminder. That love, when spoken plainly and lived loudly, lasts. That image fades, fashion fades, status shifts like sand. But truth? Truth carves itself into memory. And I saw it settle in her eyes now. That unmistakable moment when a child sees their parent fully, not as someone to correct, not as someone to edit, but as someone who built the foundation beneath their feet. And as I stepped back from the podium, my heart thudding not with pride but with peace, I knew something had tipped, not just in the room, but in her. And from that moment on, whatever came next, she would never again forget who she came from. At first I thought the applause had reached its peak, that it would rise politely, as it always does in rooms like this, and then taper into silence once the moment passed. But then something unexpected. People stood, not one or two out of obligation, but row by row, hands setting down cutlery, phones placed screen down, conversations frozen mid-sentence. They rose, not for spectacle, not for ceremony, but for truth. I stood there, still behind the podium, hands gripping its edges like it might dissolve if I let go. I hadn't come here for a standing ovation. In fact, I was braced for the opposite, for strained smiles and stiff nods, the kind that say thank you for your little moment, before the room politely resets and returns to its real business. But they didn't reset. They shifted, because something real had passed between us, something that didn't need choreography or champagne or curated applause. This was recognition, not of achievement, but of authenticity. I saw a man near the front, his watch alone probably worth more than my truck, dabbing his eyes with a cloth napkin, pretending it was just allergies. I saw a woman I vaguely recognized from one of my daughter's fundraisers clutch her chest like something had landed there and wouldn't move. Tears weren't loud, but they were everywhere, and not the kind you cry for someone else's pain. The kind you cry when your own truth gets shaken loose. I don't know if they were clapping for me. Maybe, in some way, they weren't. Maybe they were clapping for themselves, for the chance to finally feel in a room that had been built to perform. And my daughter? She hadn't stood, not at first. She just sat, hands frozen in her lap, eyes wide, unblinking, like the little girl who once watched me fix a broken cabinet with nothing but patience and wood glue. The girl who used to believe I could fix anything. And then slowly, she rose. She didn't clap at first. She just stood. Not as a host, not as a co-chair, not as a woman fighting to maintain her image. She stood as a daughter, one hand lifted, then the other, and she clapped. Not loud, not showy, but fiercely. And in that quiet, trembling rhythm, I saw everything I needed. Not forgiveness, I didn't need that. Not validation, I had already lived a full life without it. But remembering, she remembered. The man who carried her when she couldn't walk. The man who stayed up past midnight retyping her college essays when her laptop crashed. The man who worked behind the scenes so she could stand at the front. They were no longer clapping for a stranger who interrupted their dinner. They were clapping for a father. And in a room built on image, I had done the unthinkable. I had stepped forward, not polished, not perfect, but true. And the truth, it turns out, doesn't ruin the moment. It redeems it. Backstage was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something sacred, when people don't know what to say, so they let silence carry the weight. The air was cooler behind the velvet curtain, the lights dimmer, and yet everything felt brighter than it had all night. Not because of the chandeliers, but because something heavy, something buried, had just been lifted, not from my chest, from hers. I stood alone for a moment, just breathing, not to recover, but to feel it, the way you feel after the rain ends. Not just relief, but clarity. You don't rush it. You let it wash over you. And then I heard her footsteps, software hesitant, familiar in a way that reached deeper than memory. Because no matter how grown they get, a parent knows the rhythm of their child's approach. You hear them differently, like your bones remember. She didn't speak, not at first, and I didn't turn, not out of pride, but because I knew if this moment was going to mean anything, it had to come from her. For the first time in a long time, she had to close the distance. And she did. I felt her presence before I saw her, like warmth returning to a room long gone cold. No perfume, no stage smile, just her. her arms wrapped around me like she'd been waiting her whole adult life to remember how. Not the polite hugs she gave in public. This was different. This was home. She held tight, not for show, not to be seen, just to hold. And in that embrace, I didn't need her to say anything. I didn't need an apology or a thank you or a justification for the years I'd been made to feel like a footnote in my own story. Because in that moment, she wasn't clinging to the version of herself the world had demanded. She was clinging to me, the man who helped her learn to walk. The man who stayed silent at award banquets when they forgot to mention her family. The man who once sold his tools to pay for her internship abroad and never told her where the money came from. In her silence, I heard everything. I'm sorry I asked you to dim your light so mine could shine louder. I'm sorry I believed their version of success meant you didn't belong. I'm sorry I ever thought the image was more important than the root. And beneath it all, that quiet truth that needed no voice. You were never an embarrassment. You were my hero. Her shoulders shook, not violently, just enough to say that something deep, something locked up for years, had finally cracked open. I held her tighter, not as reassurance, but as remembrance. We stood like that for a long time. Father and daughter, not icons, not roles. Just two hearts, beating at the same rhythm again. And something happened in me, too. Not a swelling of pride, but a quiet reclaiming. I wasn't just her father now. I was no longer the man they tolerated in the background of the photograph. I was seen, not as a relic, not as a liability, not as someone who almost ruined the moment, but as the reason it was even possible. Backstage, beneath the weight of all that hadn't been said for years, I felt it shift. Not just her perception. My place. It was no longer borrowed. It was mine. The morning after the gala, I expected the world to return to its noise. Shallow chatter, curated feeds, polite silence. But instead, it listened. Before the sun had fully risen, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend I hadn't heard from in years. Then another. Then a dozen more. Not asking what I had said. They already knew. Just writing simply, quietly. I felt it. I saw myself in it. Thank you. I didn't rush to check the headlines. I wasn't looking for attention. I'd never learned to expect it. For most of my life, I had been the man behind the work, the builder whose fingerprints never made the photo. I'd grown used to the quiet dignity of absence. But that morning, absence was no longer the story. The first headline read, "A Father's Words. Redefine Legacy. The Speech That Silenced the Gala." Another, "When Sincerity Took the Stage, Amen Stole the Night." And then the one I'll never forget. An unforgettable speech of love and truth. No scandal. No mockery, no twisting of meaning to fit an easier narrative. Just truth, unvarnished, unpolished, undeniable. The news cycle didn't bury it under gossip. It held it. Clips of the speech began circulating online, captioned with phrases like, "We needed this," and "This is what real love sounds like." There were posts from strangers saying, "This reminded me of my dad. I wish I'd told him thank you." But the most surprising thing? They didn't crop her out. They didn't twist her expression into shame or spin it into a headline. They showed her, listening, standing beside me. Not in front, not above, beside. And for the first time in years, her image wasn't held up by strategy. It wasn't protected by consultants or perfected by lighting. It was human. I read through a few of the comments beneath the video. Some were from people who had never met us. Some from those who had shared rooms with us but never understood what was real. And they all said the same thing in one form or another. She didn't lose anything that night. She found it. The world didn't punish her for letting love speak louder than image. It admired her for it, not because she was flawless, but because she finally stopped pretending to be. That morning she called me. Her voice was quiet, not polished, not scripted, just hers. "I've had so many interviews today," she said, "and all they wanted to ask about was you." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. She continued, voice thick, and for once I didn't change the subject. That meant more to me than any applause ever could, because that wasn't just about me. That was about us. The little girl who once drew stick figure pictures of the two of us holding hands. The teenager who rolled her eyes but still sat close during movies. The woman who had forgotten for a time that her strength didn't come from the people who praised her, but from the man who raised her. That morning, the world didn't just see a viral speech. It saw us. And in the reflection of all that attention, her image finally felt like her. Not a projection. Not a performance. Just truth. And it fit her better than any dress she'd worn the night before. Years passed. The gala faded from headlines as all things eventually do. The stage was dismantled. The chandeliers stored away. The applause forgotten by most. A distant echo swallowed by the churn of newer stories, louder scandals, brighter lights. But not in our home. Not in her home. Because the moment that reshaped her didn't end when the cameras turned off. It rooted itself quietly in the folds of her life, growing not upward, toward fame, but downward, deeper, into the parts of her that no longer needed approval to feel whole. I saw it in the way she called more often, not to report successes, but just to talk. I saw it in the way she stopped editing her past when introducing me. Not, he owns a small shop, or he's semi-retired, but this is my dad. He taught me everything that mattered. I saw it in the way she hugged me now. Not stiff and brief, but long, tight, present. And then one afternoon I saw it in her daughter. She was 6. Wild curls, scraped knees, a laugh that came before any joke was finished. We sat on the floor of her living room, building towers from wooden blocks, while her mother, my daughter, made tea in the kitchen. "Grandpa?" she asked, placing a block carefully on top. "Yes, sweetheart? Mommy said you're her hero." I paused, fingers resting gently against the tower. "She said you didn't care what people thought. You just told the truth, and that made her brave." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the face first, but the heart. That evening, after bedtime stories and too many cookies, my daughter walked me to the door. The porch light flickered on. She didn't say much at first, just stood beside me as the sun tucked itself behind the hills, casting the house in gold. Then softly, almost like a prayer, she said, "I tell them that story, you know, my kids. Not the gala part, but the part about you." I turned to her, and she was already looking at me. Oh, not through me, not past me, at me. "I tell them how you stood in front of everyone," she continued, "not to take anything, but to give something I didn't even know I'd lost." She took my hand, like she used to when she was little, when parking lots seemed like mountains, and my fingers were the rope she clung to. "You didn't ruin my image," she said. "You rescued it. You made it real." And in that moment, I understood something that years of work, worry, and waiting had never quite taught me. That legacy isn't made in spotlights. It's not carved into plaques or written in press releases. Legacy is the voice that tells your grandchildren who you really were. Not what you wore or what titles followed your name, but how you loved, how you stood, and what you never let them forget. Years later, when I'm no longer there to sit on that porch or answer those little voices calling Grandpa, she'll still tell that story, not because it's dramatic, but because it mattered. Because in a world obsessed with image, a single act of truth lasts. She'll tell them of the father who risked his daughter's carefully built world to save something far more fragile. Her heart. And in doing so, she won't just be remembering me. She'll be becoming me. Not in trade or profession, but in courage. And that, more than any applause, is what I leave behind. Not an image crafted, but a life lived.